Flo's here as well. She's starting off with the Arab language press today in the International Press Review. They're focusing today on talks in Geneva. This is between members of the Syrian opposition and representatives, of course, from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Rael Al-Youm, the pan-Arab paper based in London, takes a closer look at just what the goal of this fourth round of talks is. Well, according to Rael Al-Youm, it's to essentially address Russia's unkept promises. So you can get all the details here in this article. The article points out that these UN-backed peace talks got off to a little bit of a rocky start. Over the weekend, of course, there were deadly jihadist attacks in homes, followed by retaliation from the Syrian Air Force.
Now, a lot of papers are a bit pretty pessimistic, aren't they, as the outcome of these talks? You've been looking at a Jordanian paper saying basically they're destined to fail.
That's Al-Had, the Jordanian daily, that says that part of the reason why these talks are destined to fail is because Syria's moderate opposition has really lost a lot of influence following the Battle of Aleppo. Essentially, extremist factions of extremist Islamist factions have kind of filled the void left behind by these moderate Syrian opposition forces. And so, according to this article, the more extreme opposition is incapable of compromise. And so that's why these talks are destined to fail. You can get some another feeling of pessimism in a cartoon I pulled out. This is from Al Hayat, another pan-Arab paper based in London. My colleagues from the Arabic desk helped me understand this cartoon. Essentially, what you can see here is the number 4, the fourth round of these talks in Geneva. Now, that's a backward question mark because, of course, this is, well, backward for us. This is Arabic, so it goes the other way. Mm-hmm. So that 4 is transformed into a question mark. And what the guy is thinking there is, are we just back exactly at the starting point?
Good to have it translated for us. Now, meanwhile, of course, the international coalition as well is continuing its offensive against the Islamic State group in Iraq, including in Mosul.
The French paper Le Figaro focuses on the fate of French citizens fighting alongside the Islamic State group, or Daesh, as it's called in France. An estimated 400 French citizens are fighting, whether it's in Iraq or Syria. Now, because of the fighting in Iraq, many are actually being pushed into Syria. It's quite a fascinating investigation here because, of course, the question of whether these hardened veterans are going to come back to France is a real headache for French authorities. But there's also the question of French citizens that are being held prisoner, for instance, by Syrian forces. Now, this article reminds readers that France closed its embassy in Syria in 2012. So essentially, French authorities are kind of in diplomatic limbo. They can't actually deal with Syrian officials because of that. So according to this article, for now, French citizens held by Syrian forces are going to stay in jail in Syria until the French presidential election. And everything will depend on who's elected president here in France and what their agenda is with Syria.
Going to take you to the US now. President Donald Trump says he wants to increase military spending, $54 billion, and cut as well non-military programs by the same amount here.
That's right. Some of those programs Trump wants to slash are programs relating to education, the environment, science. But what's interesting is he's reluctant to embrace cuts to entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. These programs are programs that Republicans, particularly Republicans in the Congress, say are the largest drivers of federal spending. And so that's why he's put the Republican Party here, the GOP, in quite a quandary, because you have a lot of Republicans that want to slash this kind of spending. But for now, Donald Trump seems like he's not quite, he's reluctant to cut it for now, at least.
And a lot of papers also concerned about what this enormous hike in military spending could mean in itself.
Let's stay with the Washington Post. There's a great cartoon today by Tom Tolles. You can see the White House here surrounded by all sorts of tanks, etc. The military buildup you ordered is complete now, Mr. President. Now what? And you can see that little teeny White House there saying, well, now whatever we want. And Tom Tolles says that nothing like a huge military buildup to calm fears of authoritarianism. I pulled out a really interesting editorial from The Guardian, the British paper as well, which is actually comparing Donald Trump to the president, former president George W. Bush. And it's really interesting. Now, remember, The Guardian left-wing paper was not really a big fan of George W. Bush's, but they're saying he looks pretty good compared to Donald Trump. He was considered a warmonger, a hardline conservative, so it says a lot that now he's seen as a paragon of virtue. Now, he said some very interesting things, for instance, yesterday about the press. He said it was indispensable to have a free press, so quite a different take than Donald Trump.
And meanwhile, many papers as well talking about the freedom of the press yesterday. Turkish authorities have jailed a reporter for a prominent German newspaper. Now, this is on charges of propaganda in support of a terrorist.
This is a man named Deniz Yücel. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name right. He works for Die Welt, so you can see this article in Die Welt saying, "We are Deniz." Now, he's both a Turkish and a German citizen, and so he's really getting a lot of attention in the German press today. You can see another article in Der Spiegel that says that all this is part of a destruction of understanding we're seeing in Turkey, but also in America. And this article is very critical of Donald Trump and Recep Tayyip Erdogan. They're demanding reverence rather than enlightenment, and both are mounting dangerous attacks on the freedom of press. The threat is real, and the media must hold its ground.
Thank you, Flo Vilman.